You really thought I wouldn't find out you were snooping around in the accounts? That slush fund was my insurance policy built on deals you never had the stomach for. Father knew exactly what I was doing, and he signed off on it because he knew you would run it into the ground. You signed those papers willingly, Lauren. Don't pretend you didn't trust me. If you go public with this, you'll take down more than just me. Think about what that does to the family name. Hi, my name is Lauren Bennett. I am 27 years old. Those 5 sentences from my older brother Derek landed like hammer blows inside the quiet living room of our family home. I had driven up the winding road through the hills that afternoon, carrying a folder of printed bank transfers and one internal memo expecting a conversation. Instead, I got a wall of contempt. My hands were still shaking when I walked back to my car, but my mind was already moving, already planning the next step. I had spent years trusting Derek with the one thing I valued most after my own career, the small family investment account our grandfather had set aside. I had believed him when he said the paperwork I signed was routine protective necessary. Now the memo in my bag proved the money had been quietly moved into an account only he controlled. A private slush fund he had built while telling me everything was fine. A few months earlier, my days had followed a steady rhythm. I worked as a strategic analyst at a boutique investment firm downtown. My job was to spot patterns in portfolios, flag risks, and write clear recommendations. I was good at it. I liked the precision. Most evenings, I came home to my small rented townhouse on the lower slope of the same hills, ate something simple, and reviewed client files or read. The family home sat higher up behind a gate with more land and a view that stretched to the ocean on clear days. I visited when invited. Derek lived even closer to the main house. He handled the family's real estate holdings and often spoke for our father when business decisions needed quick answers. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in late spring. Morgan Ellis, a junior compliance analyst 2 desks over from me, stopped by my workstation with a plain manila envelope. She kept her voice low. "This crossed my desk yesterday. The Bennett name is on the originating account. I thought you should see it before anyone else does." She didn't wait for questions. She walked away. Inside the envelope was a single printed memo, internal routing, only dated 3 weeks earlier. It showed a series of transfers out of the family trust account, small enough to avoid automatic flags, frequent enough to add up. The destination account was not listed under any family member I recognized. The memo had been flagged for review and then marked closed, internal resolution. Someone with authority had shut the inquiry down. I spent the next 2 evenings cross-checking old statements I still had access to through the family portal Derek had given me login credentials for years ago. The numbers matched. Money that should have stayed available for education top-ups or emergency support had been moved. The pattern started shortly after I signed the documents Derek brought me one evening at the kitchen island. He had been calm, reassuring, just updating beneficiary language and adding a layer of protection against market swings. Takes 5 minutes. I had signed without reading every line because I trusted him. He was the older brother who had always handled the complicated parts. Alex Rivera, my direct supervisor and the person who had championed my last promotion, noticed the change in my focus before I did. On a Thursday afternoon, he asked me to step into the small conference room beside the trading floor. "Lauren, your last 2 reports were solid, but you missed the secondary risk in the Henderson portfolio. That's not like you." He waited. When I didn't answer immediately, he continued quieter. "If something at home is pulling your attention, I need to know. We can adjust workload, but I can't have divided loyalty on active accounts. The firm's reputation matters." The word loyalty sat between us like a test. I told him I was handling a personal matter and it would not affect my work. He nodded once, but the look in his eyes said he was watching now. I kept digging anyway. I pulled the original trust documents from the safe in my townhouse and compared signatures and dates. One clause I had initialed gave Derek discretionary authority over reallocations above a certain threshold. Another line I had not noticed at the time allowed him to create subaccounts without additional signatures. The language was dense, but the effect was clear once I laid the pages side by side with the memo Morgan had given me. He had not needed to forge anything. He had used the trust I placed in him to move the money into a structure only he could touch. The decision to drive up to the main house came after another conversation with Alex. He pulled me aside again, this time at the end of the day. I received a note from compliance. Someone asked whether family accounts under review could create a conflict for anyone on our team. "Your name came up, I shut it down for now, but I need you to tell me what is actually happening." His tone was not unkind, but it was firm. I realized then that silence was no longer protecting anyone. I drove straight from the office to the hills. My mother, Patricia, met me at the door. She looked tired. "Your brother is in the study. He said you might come by." She did not ask what it was about. Derek was already standing when I entered. The folder with the memo and the highlighted trust pages sat on the low table between us. I placed one page in front of him and waited. That was when he spoke the 5 sentences that ended whatever version of our relationship I had been protecting. I did not raise my voice. I asked one question. "Why involve me at all if you were just going to move everything?" Derek leaned back in the leather chair. "Because you make people comfortable. Having your name on the paperwork made the transfers look legitimate." Father agreed it was the cleanest way. The second voice came from the doorway behind me. My father, Michael, had been listening. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, and looked at the papers without touching them. "I told Derek years ago that the trust was too exposed. We needed flexibility. You were never going to use that money the way we needed it used." The admission landed without drama. No raised voices. Just 3 adults in a quiet room and the sound of the air conditioning cycling on. I picked up the folder, turned, and walked past both of them. My mother was still in the hallway. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then let her hand fall. I kept walking. In the car, I sat with the engine off for several minutes. The gate at the bottom of the drive opened automatically when I approached. I drove down the hill toward the city lights already coming on. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Alex's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A text from Morgan followed. 2 minutes later, more pages came through this afternoon. "Same pattern, newer dates. Call me when you can." I pulled into a small overlook pull-off where the road widened. The city spread out below, grids of light and moving traffic. I opened the glove box, took out a small notebook, and wrote 3 lines. The date, the exact words Derek had used, and the sentence my father had added without prompting. Then I closed the notebook and placed it on the seat beside the folder. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Casey Thompson, the friend who had listened to me vent about work stress for the last 2 years without ever meeting my family. Her text was short. "You okay? You went quiet after the last message about the trust." I typed back, "Not okay, but I'm done pretending I am." I started the car and continued down the hill. The road curved, and for a moment the rearview mirror showed only darkness behind me. The house on the ridge was already out of sight. I did not look again. The phone kept lighting up on the drive down the hill, but I didn't answer. I needed the quiet to let Derek's words and my father's calm additions settle without turning into noise. By the time I reached my townhouse, I had already decided 2 things: I would not sign another document without reading every line twice, and I would not let the pattern continue just because it had always been easier to trust my older brother. The next morning, I met Morgan Ellis at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the office before either of us clocked in. She slid another printed thread across the table. The new pages showed the slush fund had been used to cover a deposit on a hillside development deal that later fell through. The developer had been quietly threatening legal action. Derek had moved the money to make the problem disappear before it reached the family trust statements. Morgan kept her voice low. I pulled the full chain because the original memo referenced an earlier approval. Someone higher up signed off on shutting the review. I'm not comfortable being the only one who saw it. She looked at me directly. "If you're going to do something with this, do it soon. These kinds of threads don't stay buried forever." I thanked her and left the shop with the new pages folded inside my bag. The walk to the office felt longer than usual. Every step reminded me that the brother I had gone to for advice on every financial decision since I was 20 had been treating the account like his private reserve. The vulnerability hit in one sharp wave. I had signed the papers because I believed he was protecting all of us. That belief had been the easiest thing in the world to use against me. Alex Rivera was waiting when I reached my desk. He asked me to step into the same small conference room as before. This time he closed the door and stayed standing. Compliance flagged the Bennett Trust activity again last night. The note mentioned possible external inquiries. I need to know if this is going to become a problem for the firm. His tone was even, but the question underneath was sharp. "I've backed you on every review since you started here. I'm asking now whether your family situation is going to force me to choose between that support and protecting the team's reputation." I told him I was handling it through proper channels and that I would have a written summary by the end of the week. He nodded, but the nod carried weight. "End of week, Lauren. I can't keep shutting doors if more keep opening." I spent the rest of the morning organizing the pages into a single timeline. By lunch, I had a clean folder ready. I called the attorney, whose name Casey had given me weeks earlier when I had mentioned the trust in passing. Jordan Hale agreed to see me that afternoon. His office was in a plain building downtown, nothing like the polished firms Derek used. Jordan reviewed the documents without commentary for almost 20 minutes. Then he looked up. The discretionary clause you initialed gives your brother authority to reallocate above a threshold. Combined with the side transfers shown in these memos, you have a credible claim for breach of that authority. The cleanest first step is a formal demand to freeze further movement and request a full accounting. I can draft it today. He paused. This will not stay private once it reaches the trust administrator. Are you prepared for that? I told him to draft it. He nodded once and began typing. That evening, my father called. The message was short. We need to talk. Just us. Tomorrow morning, the park near your office. I almost deleted it. Instead, I replied with a time. I met him on a bench under the trees where the morning traffic was loud enough to cover quiet conversation. He didn't waste time with small talk. Derek told me what he said to you. He was angry. That doesn't make it right. Then he looked at the folder I had placed between us. There's something older you should know. When you were finishing school, there was a junior position at a larger firm that came through a contact of mine. I steered the recommendation away. Derek and I decided it would pull you too far from the family accounts. We told ourselves we were protecting you from the pressure. The same way we told ourselves moving the money now was protecting the name. He said it without raising his voice. The admission sat between us like another document I hadn't been shown. I asked him if he had ever planned to tell me. He shook his head. I thought the account would stay small enough that it wouldn't matter. I was wrong. I left the park with my hands cold despite the warm morning. The pattern was no longer just Derek moving numbers. It was both of them deciding what I could handle and what I was allowed to know. The vulnerability I felt was real, but it didn't slow the next decision. I drove straight to Jordan's office and signed the authorization for the demand letter. He told me it would go out by end of day and that the trust administrator usually responded within 48 hours on formal requests. I called Casey on the way home. She listened without interrupting while I repeated what my father had said. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. You've spent years treating their word as the final one. Sounds like they spent those same years treating you as someone who didn't need the full picture. Her voice was steady. Whatever you decide next, make sure it's because you chose it, not because you're still waiting for them to explain it better. I reached my townhouse just after dark. The folder with the new demand letter copy sat on the kitchen counter. I opened my laptop and began drafting the short message I would send to Alex in the morning, a clear statement that I had retained counsel for a personal family trust matter and that it would not intersect with active client work. I hit save and closed the screen. The phone rang before I could stand up. Jordan's name appeared. I answered. His voice was calm but direct. The administrator confirmed receipt and opened an internal review. They also noted that a separate inquiry came in this afternoon from a third party asking about recent activity on the same account. The name on the inquiry was Derek's development contact. I don't know yet what they're asking, but the review is now active on 2 fronts. I thanked him and ended the call. The screen went dark. For the first time since the conversation in the study, the shaking in my hands had stopped. I picked up the notebook from the car and added one more line under the date demand letter sent. Review opened. Derek's name now attached to the inquiry. Then I closed the notebook and placed it beside the folder. The next step was already forming. I would not call Derek. I would not call my father. I would let the documents and the administrator do the talking. But the quiet in the townhouse felt heavier than before, and I knew the weight was only going to grow once the review moved beyond paperwork. The call from Jordan had ended, but the weight of his words stayed with me. The review was now active on 2 fronts, and Derek's name sat attached to an outside inquiry that had nothing to do with me. I sat at the kitchen table long after the screen went dark, the notebook open in front of me. I added one final line under the timeline, the date, the time, and the single word active. Then I closed the notebook and placed it inside the folder with the demand letter copy. The shaking in my hands had stopped days ago. What remained was a clear, steady anger that no longer needed volume to be heard. The next morning, I sent Alex the written summary I had promised. It was short and factual. I had retained counsel for a personal family trust matter that would be handled entirely outside firm channels. I would continue to meet every deadline and would flag any potential overlap immediately. He replied within the hour with a single sentence, "Understood. Keep me updated if anything changes." The distance in those words was exactly what I had expected and exactly what I needed. The secondary pressure at work eased, but the space it left felt colder than before. Jordan called again just before lunch. The administrator confirmed the freeze on further transfers. They also confirmed the third-party inquiry came from the developer's office. They are treating it as a formal complaint about fund handling. Derek has been asked to provide documentation by the end of the week. He paused. This is moving faster than these things usually do. Someone wants answers. I thanked him and asked what came next. We wait for the accounting. If they find irregularities, they will escalate internally. Your name stays on the original trust documents, so you will receive copies of everything. Beyond that, you can step back. I wanted to step back. I also knew Derek would not let it end quietly. The call came that same afternoon while I was still at my desk. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring once, then answered on speaker with Jordan already on the other line as we had planned. Derek's voice came through sharp and controlled the same tone he had used in the study. You really couldn't leave it alone, could you? One memo, and you run straight to a lawyer like the family never did a single thing for you. I kept my voice even. The memo showed transfers that required my signature under false information. Jordan is handling the accounting request, that's all. He laughed once short and cold. You think this review stays between us? People in the hills are already asking why the trust administrator is suddenly interested in our accounts. You just handed them a reason to look at every deal I've touched in the last 2 years. Congratulations. You protected your little principles and burned the name we all carry. I let the silence sit for a moment before I answered. I signed those papers because I trusted you. Father admitted he helped steer opportunities away from me years ago for the same reason. Your actions and his proved where the loyalty actually lived. I am done pretending otherwise. Derek started to speak again, but I cut in before he could finish the sentence. This is the last conversation we will have about the trust or any family financial matter. If the administrator needs anything from me, they will go through Jordan. Do not call me again. Do not send messages through Mother. If you need to reach me for any legal reason, use my attorney's contact information. That is the boundary. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then the line went dead. I ended the call with Jordan and sat with the phone in my hand until the screen dimmed. The anger was still there, but it had narrowed into something smaller and sharper. I opened my email and drafted the short message I had been carrying in my head since the conversation in the study. It went to both Derek and my father. The subject line was simple boundary on future contact. The body was 3 sentences. I would communicate only through Jordan Hale on any trust or financial matter. I would not attend family discussions about the accounts. I would not sign additional documents. Any attempt to circumvent the boundary would be documented and forwarded to counsel. I read it twice, then hit send. My mother called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short and careful. Your brother is under a lot of pressure right now. The community association is asking questions about some of his recent projects. I know you are upset, but we are still family. Can we talk? I saved the message but did not reply. 2 days later, she called again. I saved that message too. On the 3rd day, she sent a text. I read it once and deleted it without answering. The pattern was clear. They wanted the conversation to continue on their terms. I had already chosen different terms. The review moved forward without my direct involvement. Jordan forwarded the first accounting summary 2 weeks later. The numbers confirmed what the memos had suggested and more. Transfers had been routed through the Slush fund to cover shortfalls on 2 separate hillside projects. One of those projects involved partners who sat on the same community association board as Derek. The questions in the enclave were no longer quiet rumors. A contact of Casey's who worked in real estate development mentioned in passing that Derek's name had come up in a due diligence call as someone whose recent fund movements were under review. Casey told me without drama, "People are being careful what they say out loud, but they are asking." She did not offer advice. She simply passed the information and waited to see what I would do with it. I did nothing. I did not call Derek. I did not call my father. I did not ask Casey for more details. The boundary I had set was not in negotiation. It was a line I had drawn around the part of my life that no longer belonged to them. The loneliness that followed was not dramatic. It was the ordinary quiet of evenings spent alone in the townhouse of weekends, without the drive up the hill of holidays that would now pass without the familiar weight of expectation. Some nights, the quiet felt like relief. Other nights, it felt like the cost of the choice I had made. Both were true at the same time. Alex stopped pulling me into the small conference room. My reports returned to their previous standard. The firm moved on. Morgan Ellis never mentioned the memos again, but she nodded once when we passed in the hallway, the smallest acknowledgement that she had seen what she needed to see and had chosen to act on it. Jordan continued to forward updates. The administrator's review remained open. Derek's development contact withdrew from at least one scheduled meeting. None of it restored anything I had lost. None of it gave me back the years I had spent signing papers I had not read, because I believed the person asking me to sign had my best interest at heart. One evening in early fall, I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open for the last time. I read through the timeline once more from the first memo Morgan had slipped me to the boundary message I had sent. Then I tore the pages out, fed them into the shredder, and watched the thin strips fall into the bin. The folder with the demand letter copy went into a locked drawer. I would keep the records in case the administrator ever needed them, but I would not keep carrying the story in my daily life. The pattern my father had finally admitted, and the slush fund my brother had built, both proved the same thing. Loyalty had never been mutual. It had been a tool used to keep me in place while decisions were made without me. My action in response was simple. I stopped participating in the system that required my trust to function. I did not demand an apology. I did not wait for the review to deliver public justice. I set the boundary and I kept it. The price was the quiet that now filled the spaces where family conversations used to live. The gain was the certainty that no one else would sign my name to documents I had not chosen to read. I still live in the same townhouse on the lower slope. I still work at the same firm. The drive up the hill no longer appears on my calendar. Some days I pass the turnoff without thinking. Other days I notice it and keep driving. Both feel like the same choice now. I chose myself over the version of family that required me to stay small enough to be useful. That choice did not come with celebration or restored relationships. It came with the steady, ordinary freedom of knowing exactly where the line was and knowing I would not cross it again. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were standing where I stood holding that folder and hearing those words from the person you had trusted most, would you cut contact?